Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Today, we have a very special bonus episode. We have a story of a DevOps transformation to share with you. Our guests are friend of the show and past guest as well, Jeff Campbell. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Vasco.
And his colleague at Meltwater, János Csorvácsi. I probably mispronounced that, so János, apologies for that. Hey,
No
welcome.
worries. Thank you.
So Jeff, as many of you already know, is an Agile coach and also the author of Actionable Agile Tools, which you can get on Amazon and directly from the author at bit.ly/AAT book, all one word, all lowercase. I'll put the link on the show notes to that. And János is a principal engineer at Meltwater's developer productivity team. He'll tell us all about that in a second. And he's been with the company for several years in various roles, including exploratory testing, infrastructure development, software engineering, and helping other engineers succeed at their jobs. János and Jeff, you were working at Meltwater when the DevOps adoption process started over there. Now, many of our listeners have probably experienced an Agile transformation and may not be aware of what a DevOps transformation means in practice. So how does a DevOps transformation differ from an Agile transformation?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure, honestly, that they do differ at this point in time, or at least they kind of shouldn't. I think the simplest way I know to put that is the DevOps transformation is really mostly the technical side, I guess, of the Agile transformation. It's about, building solid technical practices and the mindset around what it takes to get things to out to your customers and to be able to maintain them and have them be of a good quality. So I think, frankly, nowadays, both of those things are kind of going hand in hand. I'm not sure they differ that much.
Yeah, I would say that for us, at least from the software engineer perspective, the biggest difference could be that we took ownership of our systems, right? As you said about the technical part. It wasn't just about changing our processes, how we work day to day, how we organize our work and all that, but it was actually about taking ownership of our systems. Before we developed software that we handed over to an operations team who then took it, deployed it to production, operated it, and all that. And we went from that place to basically taking full ownership of our systems. We develop, we deploy, we take care of it, we're on call, right?
All right. So I'm sure that for some of our listeners, at least, that requires a little bit more of explanation. So if you would say, like, what are the 3 to 5 biggest differences for you as a development team when you, as you said, János, take over the ownership of the system? Like, what are the biggest differences?
The biggest difference, the single biggest difference is definitely, as I mentioned, being on call for our systems, meaning we had to and still have to provide 24/7 coverage. That was previously the task of a dedicated technical operations team. Now I have to carry around with me at all times my work phone, and when I'm on call, of course, my laptop as well, and have to make sure that I'm ready to work within, say, half an hour, sit down, have internet connection, and be able to troubleshoot an issue. And that is a huge difference, right? Taking ownership from the beginning of the process, trying to implement the feature or coming up with the feature to implement, to actually making sure that the thing operates and it actually does what it's supposed to in a way that it was supposed to be done. And so that allowed us to do a bunch of things. For example, have way better quality services, less downtime and all that, because the systems we developed, all of a sudden, we were being paid for it if we broke it, if we implemented some logic badly, or it had resource. The services had resource problems and all that. all of a sudden fixing those kind of things became quite a high priority because nobody likes to be woken up at 2 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday.
Yeah, and I think the big difference that you get there is when you have another team handling it, what you end up doing is a lot of remediation, right? You end up addressing the symptom a lot of the time, right? If the service is down, getting the service back up. But because that information of what the problem is never gets back to the team who actually builds the thing, you never actually fix the underlying root cause, which when you're responsible for it the whole way, then you have a lot more motivation and ability really to fix the root cause.
Now, you guys said that one of the big differences between a DevOps and an Agile transformation is that you don't only focus on processes, but I'm guessing from János, what you just described, you actually had to change your processes quite heavily, if nothing else, because you created an on-call process for the development team, right? But I'm sure there were other changes. So can you give us an overview of what changed as you went from what was previously a dev plus operation team setup to a DevOps team setup?
Right. So our whole organization kickstarted this process to transform, to adopt the DevOps mindset. And here, I think it's important to mention a mindset and not, we don't talk about DevOps engineers. DevOps engineer is not a thing. But what we wanted to do is every engineer at the company, for every engineer at the company to adopt a mindset and to transform into this team that now operates in a different way. So we changed from having feature teams with product owners that, get a feature that they need to implement or come up with a feature they need to implement. They work on it for a couple of weeks at a time for a few sprints, maybe, and then give the package to a technical operations team who then deploy it. And they know nothing about this package that they deploy. The interaction between developers and the operations team was rare. Engineers or developers outnumbered the technical operations team by many fold. I don't recall the exact numbers, but there was maybe 10 developers, 15 to 1 operations person.
Yeah, if not even more.
Right. So there were many development teams and a tech ops team distributed all over the world, following an on-call rotation, kind of the follow the sun on-call rotation. So they would hand over to each other any incidents that were ongoing, and sometimes they would bring in developers to help out with troubleshooting something in production. But of course, teams would not have access to production. They would not be able to log into production, see what the issues are, diagnose by themselves. They would have to get on a screen share with a tech ops person who had the access, but none of the knowledge, the domain knowledge of the system, and then go from there. So that was the basic setup, right? And this kind of setup obviously had its pitfalls. And so we embarked upon this transformation where one of the end goals, I would say, was to have these cross-functional teams that are able to do all of this, right? Are able to come up with the features they need to implement. They implement the features, and then they deploy themselves to production, and they troubleshoot in production. And in this world, there was not a need anymore for a technical operations team. So that was a challenge, right? Because obviously the technical operations team had huge amounts of domain knowledge of the production systems, but also how to do the job of being a on-call engineer messing with production. So there was a fair bit of education as well that needed to happen to teach people how to interact with production systems, how to take that part of the job very seriously and not cause downtime for the entire application. And then we needed to scratch an itch in the organization, basically to allow the teams to be autonomous, to allow the teams to be faster, deploy faster, develop faster, and all that, and not have to wait for others, whatever team it may be.
So it sounds to me from what you're describing that it was perhaps not only, but like a big part was to bring what were already defined operations processes, operation deployment and support, into the development teams. You call them feature teams that were already working, right? Like, what was that? How you see it, the biggest change?
Yes. So that was one of the larger changes. That was quite a challenge for a lot of our engineers, right? Because now they thought that they had to wear multiple hats at the same time, be the Java engineer, but also be the Linux guru. So, that kind of thing was difficult for a lot of teams. And that's when we thought that, we needed to make this thing easier for teams. We still needed to support them, but not in a do kind of way, but rather in a teach kind of way. So I would say that's kind of when we formed the developer productivity team at the company, which was basically at the time of its inception made of mostly old operations team members and some infrastructure developers and some quote unquote DevOps engineers as well, responsible for CI/CD, for example, those kind of systems, or logging systems, metric systems, really telemetry and that kind of thing. So we put this team together to solve common problems in the organization, right? So say we have 30 engineering teams at the time, they don't have to reinvent the wheel 30 times, right? Our job was to implement common services, basically. These systems that I mentioned, for example, come up with a shared CI/CD solution, come up with shared telemetry solutions, and also educate people and help them operate their systems and keep their systems alive.
Yeah, so I think I heard this put really well yesterday in a meeting I was in. If you have a team who develops a particular piece of business functionality, and that's where their expertise is, understanding their user's use case, knowing how, all the things they've built work together and what it takes to, develop them and all that sort of thing. Every minute they spend not doing that is a waste of, their particular skill set, right? While at the same time, they can't have no knowledge of how the thing actually operates in production, because that's a problem as well. But you want to make all the things they're doing that are not their core skill set as easy as humanly possible, which is what the developer productivity team does.
So it sounds to me that this developer productivity team was a solution to a challenge. As I understood it, the challenge was to get a lot of feature teams to learn how to operate, not just develop the software that they were developing before. But I'm sure that wasn't the only challenge you faced, and definitely not the only solution you came up with. So tell us a little bit more about what were some of the challenges you faced as you started this DevOps transformation.
So I think one of the more interesting things to start on is actually the challenges we faced in this developer productivity team, because I think they're no different than most challenges that most teams face. But also a lot of organizations are trying to do this now, right? Create these teams to do this. They see a need for it, but then they run into sort of some of the same problems that we found ourselves running into. A really good example is the job you were doing previously. That doesn't just evaporate overnight, right? So we had all these operations people who had all the information about how all the systems worked. And just because we didn't want them to be operations people anymore, it didn't mean that the jobs they were doing vanished, right? It wasn't, you couldn't just leave production broken because that was not supposed to be their focus anymore.
Right. And these people, our team at the time, we were getting a lot of questions directly through direct messages, right? All at the same time, we were trying to focus on this new team that we just formed and how we're going to make everything better, come up with these new systems and services for the entire organization. It's all very exciting, but we're still getting direct messages from people asking to support thing X or Y. So we had this new roadmap, I would say, with all the exciting stuff, but we were making very slow progress at it. And we didn't exactly know why. I mean, it was obviously not a surprise to anybody that they were being slowed down by these questions that we were getting, and all the effort we spent on teaching other teams. That was part of the job, but still, we wanted to get to the exciting stuff, right? Building all these new and cool services.
And I think you see this exact problem in any sort of agile transformation, even if it's not this type of team. You see that when suddenly you're like, well, we need a QA person, we need a UI person, we need all of these different roles in a single team. The things they were doing before don't just vanish. I see this with quality assurance a lot, right? They're still being pulled back into whatever their old job was all the time, and they're not able to actually focus on being the new team and building the new things they're supposed to build. And you say direct messages, János. Let's not forget about walk-ups, because we were still in an office in those days. So people would just walk up with their questions, which was a very common, like a lot of information was sort of held geographically, because, you go to the person who helped you last time. They have the answer. They're going to be helpful, right? So you go walk over and talk to that person again. But that means all their time they're spending doing that is not time they're spending improving the situation.
Right. And of course, you can't not help them, right? After all, they came up to you in person, or they messaged you directly, because you're the person that helped last time. You're the most helpful person there is. So you can't not help them. You can't leave things being broken, right?
So I imagine that at some point this started to cause maybe conflicts. Maybe some manager got wind that the team was working on a lot of things, but not on the stuff they wanted done. So what happened then?
Right. I wouldn't say there was a conflict, but we were struggling a bit. As I mentioned, we really wanted to get to the exciting stuff and just move forward. And so I think it was our manager at the time who said, like, okay, let's try this. Let's run this experiment. Let's track everything that happens to the team. And with everything, we really do mean everything. Every single question that came in, either via a public channel in Slack or a direct message or a in-person walk-up, every question, every request needs to be tracked. Every piece of work from previous responsibilities needs to be tracked. Every training or hiring effort, all of those needed to be tracked. All alerts as well needed to be tracked, as in production issues, right? Where we needed to throw everything away or wake up in the middle of the night and troubleshoot something. So really track everything. We were using at the time Jira, and still are using Jira to track everything. And this meant a ticket for everything.
You can imagine that was a well-received proposal. Everybody's always really enthusiastic about using Jira, and they can't wait to do more of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I was one of those people, definitely. I was quite skeptical at first of how this entire thing is going to work out. One of my bigger arguments at the time was that this is insane. Like, someone comes up to me in person, asks a quick question, I answer. It's going to take more time to write a proper Jira ticket for that, to track it, than it takes to answer the question. So why would I do that? But I said my thing. I disagreed, but I committed, as we do in the team, and it worked out very well in the end. But it was a rocky start, I would say.
So how did they convince you, János?
I mean, I didn't need convincing, right? It's not true. Nobody actively worked on convincing me. The data convinced me. We may have disagreed in the team, but we still committed. We still started doing it. And then when we started to evaluate the data that we had after a few weeks or a few months, then it was mind-blowing, honestly.
What were some of the insights you got?
First and foremost, the sheer volume of things that we worked on. So we put up a unplanned swim lane, I think, in Jira. And that's how we started out all of our stand-ups, to talk about all the unplanned items since 24 hours ago, daily stand-ups, right? And sometimes an engineer would talk for like 15, 20 minutes about all the various things that they did in the past 24 hours, while they were still supposed to work on some kind of planned item that we pulled into a sprint. So, just the sheer volume of extra work. Nobody had an idea. Nobody, not even our manager, not the engineers, not the coach, not the PO, nobody. That was pretty mind-blowing, the sheer amount of work that we were doing.
Jeff, as you were going through some of those daily meetings, how did you feel as a coach?
I mean, as always, I'm happy when the problem's been visualized, right? That's always the first step in fixing it, I think, is that people can actually see it. And that's exactly what you want, is that reaction that János is talking about. Like, oh, wow, I can't believe how much stuff is here. And I think this really is what's happening in, at least for me, the majority of software teams that I'm working with. It's not doing the actual development of the things they've planned that's taking the majority of their time. It's all the other stuff that they're not keeping track of. So yeah, I would say I was, what's the word? I felt vindicated, maybe is the right word.
I'm guessing you guys had some tough conversations about this tracking thing before you started.
I mean, as János says, there was some debate around it, I think, but also we were very good at that point at the, well, can we just try it culture? I think we had come pretty far in that. And once you've got that down, you can short circuit a lot of these debates. I mean,
now, we talked about the can we just try it culture before with Gene and was it Scott? But can you give us like the 1 minute version of what is that can we just try it culture, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, you can spend a lot of time and energy trying to stop yourself from making the wrong decision or trying to find a way to make the right decision, but that takes forever. So, a lot of the time, if you can get to this just saying, well, could we just give it a try for 2 weeks and see what happens? And then you evaluate it at the end of that 2 weeks. There are very few things people are unwilling to just try out for a brief period of time, right? So the basic idea is, I don't know if we ever stated this explicitly, but if somebody thought something was actively dangerous, then they would say no. But, most things aren't. Most things, like, how bad can it possibly go in 2 weeks? It'll get a little uncomfortable or things will be a little worse, right? And when you have that approach, then, yeah, you short circuit these never ending discussions where you're trying to get, the last person in the room to agree to the thing that 4 people have already agreed to do. You just say, we'll try it for 2 weeks. And if it didn't work out, then we'll go back to the way it was.
Is that how you remember it, János?
Oh, yeah. 2 weeks, trying something for 2 weeks is definitely not a huge ask. And if people can still say they disagree with this, but they're willing to try it out, then it's still, not, people still feel heard that they might not like this idea. And we had experiments that we just ditched after a couple of weeks because it wasn't working out. It's fine. But then again, we had experiments that worked out very well, and we pulled them in, and they've been part of our working processes for years at this point. So they just keep iterating over all these things, over our work processes, not even week to week or sprint to sprint, day to day. Something just doesn't work out. Let's try it a different way, see what happens.
So this idea of let's just try it kind of reminds me of one of the reasons why we want to adopt Agile in the first place. One wonders why more teams and more Agile transformations don't do it this way, right? Because you can always start from whatever you're facing, whatever that challenge may be, and you can try something for a short period of time, have the right approach to measure it, and of course, make a conclusion based on that. When you look back, if having a just try it culture was one of the great things that you took from that DevOps transformation way back when, what was the opposite? What were some of the things you wish you would have done differently at that time? Let's start with Jeff.
Yeah, it's a tough one because I think, all of those things that didn't work out also really contribute to what did work out, right? I mean, you have to fail at things to really know what was going to work. So, yeah, I think it's hard to pinpoint the things I wish that we hadn't done. I'm thinking in most cases, I really do think it's just more, I wish we had done things a little bit earlier. If I think about this track everything approach, I mean, it was a long time that this team was suffering by, being pulled in 12 different directions. And if we had just started doing that earlier, we might have made progress a little bit earlier. I'm not sure there's a lot of things that spring to mind this instant, but maybe once János goes, I'll be inspired, that I just wouldn't have done at all. Stuff that came before, maybe. I wouldn't have done the whole, and I mean, you see this everywhere you go. Let's just plop the Spotify model down on top of this organization and then everything will be fixed. And that goes for everything, right? That's not Spotify. It's like, just make everybody do Scrum and that's the solution to your problem. Here you go, install safe. And once safe version 1.1 is installed, then all your problems will be fixed. There was certainly a phase when we were doing that. I do wish we could have just skipped right over that part. But I think even that, I think people had to learn that it doesn't work that way before we could start doing it the good way, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Wish we've done that earlier. Like we've been through trying Kanban and then sprints, and now we work in a different way. I think Simona was on this podcast, right? Talking about our modified Basecamp shape up way of working. I think it works very well for us right now, but I can't recommend anyone do this just because this other company, this other team does it and it works well for them. For us, it was very important that we matured through these processes throughout the years, and we ended up with something that works well for us, for this specific group of people working in this specific company in this specific way, being the developer productivity team. So we went through a lot of these experiments, I think.
When you look at this, János, you said we've matured throughout the years, experimented and come to what we have today, which is probably different from what you will have tomorrow anyway. But if you look at that, like, what would you describe was the key enabler, the thing that allowed you and your team to be able to slowly but surely move on from what they had before and always find something better? What kept you going?
I would say it's the people, really. We have a lot of people in the team who have this mindset, starting with Jeff, for example, to keep improving, to keep experimenting and see what happens. Simona also as well, our team lead, I think he spends a lot of time actively or passively just thinking about these things, how we could be better, how we could be doing better. Yeah, and basically just experiment. He read about this shape up thing and then gave us a presentation, I would say, how it's going to work out. And then we started with something and then kept building on top of that. I think what also contributes is autonomy. I think there's a lot of trust from the company and our team to allow us to experiment and be mature enough to find our way and not get stuck with something that is not working for us.
Yeah, and I think that's a thing that probably Meltwater doesn't always get enough credit for, is really embracing this idea of autonomy. Because in so many organizations, autonomy is like, yes, an autonomous team, as long as they follow the exact rules that we've laid out for them to follow. which, I'm not saying autonomy has no boundaries to it whatsoever, but Meltwater has been very good at saying, like, not everything is going to work everywhere. Let teams figure out what is important for them and what works for them, and giving them the freedom to do that, which a lot of organizations don't, right? A lot of organizations are just like, everyone's going to do Scrum. That's not open to negotiation.
And by the way, to be fair, it's not only organizations, but sometimes teams themselves don't want to take that autonomy because it brings responsibility, right? Like you're on the hook for the stuff you decide to do on your own, but you can always blame some agile coach, Jeff, hint, hint, for the stuff they bring to the team.
Yeah, so it's a good point.
And actually, the book that Jeff wrote, that Actionable Agile Tools, has a lot of stories of tools that he came up with in order to help teams figure out what they wanted, right? Just creating visibility, for example. The Unconference, which is not a tool, it's a whole system that we've talked about here on the podcast before with Jeff and Gene as well. And I think that's also one of the important aspects that we need to bring as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, which is kind of the creating the space for the team to also be able to take the courage to experiment, right? And not just wait for somebody to tell them what to do. How do you see the role of the Agile coach and Scrum Master to bring in perhaps the spark, the trigger, but then step back and let the team own what needs to change?
Oh, I think they're absolutely vital. Just having the ability to take a step back and say, like, hey guys, I think maybe we could try this. Hey guys, I think this is not working well. Maybe we could look at this. Or, just having how should I put that? Having the ability to step in any conversation and kind of not have an opinion and stop the conversation and direct it somewhere, to a better place. I think these are absolutely vital in a team to have. Sometimes engineers get so stuck in locally optimizing a problem that they can't see the bigger picture. Maybe can't see can't see a way out, basically. And that's where having someone like Jeff can come in and say, hey, let's try something.
Yeah, because I do think sometimes in a lot of teams I work with, there's a little bit of learned helplessness, right? There's a little bit of this whole, like, they don't see that there's anything that they can do about it, when really small changes can have a big impact, right? So just getting some of those small changes in and showing the team that they can guide their own process, can impact themselves, I think can help a lot.
Especially when a team is suffering from something, for example, a bad situation, a bad process, a bad coworker, God forbid, then a coach can be a guiding light, that there is light in the end of the tunnel. We can do something about this. It's in your power to do something. And sometimes just reminding the team of that, you think it's extremely trivial, right? Thinking back at it, it's like saying a sentence or two, but kind of reinforcing that. And as I think Amr has been on the podcast, right? Repetition is the key to learning.
Repetition is indeed the key to learning.
Right? So reinforcing those kind of ideas, sometimes it's very crucial and can open up a lot of people to actually try some things or actively think about how they could get out of the problematic situation, get out of suffering.
I always say, like, 90% of my job is me getting paid to just simply sit and listen, and then at the end say, so what are we going to do about it?
It's like the plumber, right? Anyone can change a pipe. The plumber knows what pipe to change. Guys, it's been a pleasure to have you here. I'm sure our conversation could go on for a few more hours. It's getting so interesting. However, we must wrap up here. So let's start with János. So where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
I would say people can find me on LinkedIn if they just search for my profile, János Csorvási, but I realize it's hard to write from that pronunciation.
I will put the link on the note, for sure.
Thank you. Otherwise, we do have an engineering blog for Meltwater, underthehood.meltwater.com. We do publish some great blog posts and articles there. I would say go check it out.
Absolutely. I will put the link to that also on the show notes. How about you, Jeff?
As always, you can find me at rebelalliance.se or Jeff Campbell on LinkedIn. If you try to find me on Twitter, do not confuse me with the shoe designer. That happens.
There's another Jeff Campbell there.
That happens so much you wouldn't believe it. If there's stilettos on the profile, you're probably in the wrong place.
Jeff is Zebra003 on Twitter.
Zebra003, yeah.
There you go.
Other than that, if you're in Sweden, I'm very active in the community, so I'm at lots of meetups and those types of things.
Mostly on the west coast of Sweden these days, right?
Correct.
It's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much for coming and sharing your insights, your knowledge, and your experience with our listeners. So thank you very much.
Thank you as always, Vasco.
Thank you for having us.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.